The galaxy, once a place of relative peace and prosperity, had fallen into disarray following the collapse of the unified galactic empire. Each star system, each faction, now operated in isolation, driven by its own ambitions and struggles for power. Earth, once a fledgling species, had grown into a beacon of resilience. After decades of turmoil, humanity had emerged as a technological and military powerhouse, but even Earth's rise had not been enough to heal the rifts between the fractured stars. Captain Alara Gray, the most respected and tactical mind in the Galactic Defense Fleet, stood at the helm of the Indomitable, the last of humanity's warships capable of facing the alien threat. As she stared out at the vast expanse of stars, the weight of her mission pressed heavily on her shoulders. If the galaxy was ever to stand a chance against the alien invaders, the divided factions would have to unite under one banner, and she would be the one to lead them. Her mission was simple yet impossible: to convince the leaders of the galaxy's greatest factions to set aside their differences and fight together. It wasn't just diplomacy. This was an urgent matter of survival. The alien fleet, mysterious in its origins but terrifying in its efficiency, had already struck several star systems. Entire planets were wiped out in mere days, leaving nothing but a graveyard of burning stars. Alara's first stop was the heart of the Teldra Coalition, a group of militaristic, war-hardened warriors who prized strength above all else. The Teldrans were a powerful force, but their brutal ways often clashed with the more strategic approaches of other factions. If anyone could inspire them to join forces with humanity, it was Alara. She arrived at the Teldra capital, a fortress world surrounded by harsh winds and swirling storms. The air was thick with tension as she met with General Vorkus, the grizzled leader of the Teldran military, known for his cold calculations and ruthless tactics. "You must understand, Captain." Vorkus's voice was low, almost a growl. "We do not join alliances lightly. The Teldra fight only for themselves. We have no need for alliances when our strength alone can secure our future." Alara didn't flinch. She knew better than to take Vorkus's words at face value. The Teldra had been fighting their own wars for centuries. Yet she knew that the alien fleet was unlike anything they had faced before. This wasn't about victory or survival through sheer strength. It was about preserving the galaxy itself. "You're right, General, but strength alone will not win this war. The alien fleet has already shown they can overwhelm even the mightiest forces. They are not here for conquest. They are here to eradicate. Alone, none of us stand a chance." Vorkus studied her, his eyes narrowing with suspicion, yet there was a flicker of something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps doubt, beneath his hardened exterior. "Then what do you propose, Captain?" "An alliance," Alara replied, her voice firm but calm. "Humanity has developed a network, a way to unite our forces across the stars. We have the technology to synchronize our fleets, share intelligence instantly, and coordinate our strikes. Together, we can fight back, not as separate factions, but as one." Vorkus chuckled darkly, the sound echoing through the chamber. "And you believe we will trust you? Humanity. After all these years of fighting on our own, you expect us to lay down our arms and bow to your unity." The challenge was clear, but Alara didn't back down. She had anticipated his skepticism. She stepped forward, locking eyes with him. "If we don't unite now, General, we won't survive long enough to fight. The enemy won't give us that chance. This isn't about trust. It's about survival. We can either fight as we always have, alone and divided, or we can face extinction together." The words hung in the air, and for a long moment, Vorkus was silent, his mind clearly at war. Finally, he spoke. "I'll give you one chance, Captain. One chance to prove that your unity is more than just empty words. If you fail, we'll turn on you just as we have turned on every other alliance. You have my word." With that, the first door was opened, but the journey was far from over. As Alara departed the Teldra world, she knew this was only the beginning. Convincing the rest of the galaxy to follow suit would be an even harder challenge, and time was running out. The alien fleet had already struck again, and their next target was a world humanity could not afford to lose. The storm was coming, and Alara was about to make her stand. With General Vorkas's reluctant agreement in hand, Captain Alara Gray set course for the next stage of her mission, the heart of the Crystallian Dominion. The Crystallians, a race of highly intellectual beings, had long been a technological powerhouse, but their refusal to engage in warfare had made them isolated from the galaxy's conflicts. However, their vast knowledge of advanced systems could hold the key to the alliance humanity so desperately needed. The Crystallians, with their crystalline structures and their penchant for research, were not easily swayed by force or emotion. They valued logic above all else, and their leaders, known as the High Council, were notoriously difficult to approach. But Alara had something the Crystallians would find impossible to ignore: the concept of the Crimson Nexus. The Crimson Nexus was humanity's greatest achievement, an advanced neural network capable of linking the minds of entire fleets and galactic leaders across light years. Alara had seen its prototype in action, and the results were nothing short of extraordinary. The Nexus allowed for seamless communication, instantaneous strategic coordination, and, most importantly, the ability to make decisions as a unified whole. However, the technology was incomplete. Humanity's scientists had only scratched the surface of what the Nexus could do, and the Crystallians' unparalleled expertise in neural technology was the missing piece. As Alara's ship docked in the Crystallian capital, she felt the weight of the task ahead. The towering spires of the Dominion city stretched into the sky, reflecting the sun in intricate patterns, their surfaces shimmering with a subtle, otherworldly glow. The Crystallians moved in unison, their bodies refracting light in ways that were both beautiful and unsettling. Alara could feel the weight of their presence, their intelligence almost palpable in the air around her. The meeting with the High Council was set in one of their grandest halls, an enormous translucent structure that seemed to hover above the planet's surface. As she entered, the council members, all seated in a perfect circle, regarded her with quiet curiosity. Their sharp, crystalline eyes glowed with an inner light, but their expressions were unreadable. Captain Alara Gray, one of the council members, a tall Crystallian known as Zuran, spoke first. "Your species has made quite an impact on the galaxy in recent years. We've observed your rapid ascent with interest, but you come before us now, requesting something far greater than technology. You seek to bind us to your cause. Why should we?" Alara stood tall, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "The alien forces you've no doubt been observing are not like anything the galaxy has ever faced. They are not conquerors or invaders. They are harbingers of death. I'm offering you something that could change the course of this war. The Crimson Nexus is more than just a weapon. It is a bridge. It allows us to connect, to fight together, as one. You can help us complete it. You can help us unite the galaxy." Zuran tilted his head, his crystalline form shifting subtly. "You ask us to place our trust in something incomplete, a network that could invade our minds, influence our decisions. You say it is a bridge, but it could just as easily become a prison." Alara's heart sank for a moment, but she pressed on. The Nexus was never meant to control. It was meant to unite, and it is humanity's intention to ensure that it does not fall into the wrong hands. You don't have to trust it fully right now, but we need your expertise. The galaxy cannot stand divided while our enemies close in on every side. The room was silent for a long moment, the tension thick in the air. The Crystallians were not known for rash decisions, and Alara could feel the weight of their scrutiny. Zuran finally spoke again, his voice calm but tinged with a warning. "We will not give you the full resources you ask for, Captain. But we will provide the knowledge you need to advance the Nexus. If it fails, humanity will bear the consequences, and if it succeeds, we will be watching closely." Alara nodded, knowing that this was the best she could hope for. The Crystallians were a cautious race, and gaining even a limited form of their assistance was a victory. She had secured another step in her mission, but the real challenge lay ahead, getting the fractured factions to trust each other and unite under one banner. As she departed the Crystallian capital, Alara couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were walking a dangerous line. The Nexus, now under construction, would be the galaxy's best hope, but it was also its greatest gamble. If it failed, if even one faction refused to fully embrace it, the entire alliance could crumble. And the alien fleet was closing in faster than anyone dared to admit. With the Crystallian Dominion's cautious support secured, Captain Alara Gray set her course toward the next pivotal faction, the Eridani Syndicate. Unlike the militaristic Teldra or the intellectual Crystallians, the Eridani were traitors, mercenaries, and opportunists. Their home system was a labyrinth of artificial space stations, thriving on commerce and political intrigue. To them, everything had a price, even the future of the galaxy. The Eridani Syndicate's political structure was complex and fluid, with no central government, only influential guilds and corporations. Each had its own interests, its own agenda. Alara knew this would be the most challenging faction to persuade. Convincing the Syndicate to join the effort would require not just diplomacy, but a demonstration of tangible benefits. Upon arrival in the Eridani system, Alara's ship was guided through a network of bustling trade stations, each a colossal ring of steel and glass suspended in space. These stations were the heart of the Syndicate's operations, and Alara was quickly escorted to the largest, a floating city of luxury and secrets, known as the Nexus. It was here that the Syndicate's leadership resided, and it was here that the delicate art of negotiation would be put to the test. Inside the Nexus, the halls were a stark contrast to the military fortresses and crystalline spires Alara had encountered. Soft lighting bathed lavishly decorated rooms, with holographic advertisements flashing in the background, offering everything from rare technologies to mercenary contracts. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes, and the clink of champagne glasses echoed from every corner. At the heart of this decadent maze was the Syndicate's ruling council, a group of 10 powerful figures known as the Guildmasters. Each represented a different faction within the Syndicate: bankers, arms dealers, and tech moguls. Alara had only one chance to make an impression, so she had come prepared. Sitting before the Guildmasters, Alara spoke firmly, her voice unwavering despite the ostentatious surroundings. The galaxy is on the brink of annihilation. There is a threat like no other. You may have your interests, your profits, and your wars, but if the alien forces succeed in wiping out entire systems, there will be no market left to exploit. The Crimson Nexus is the key to uniting the galaxy's defenses, and I am asking you to join us. The Guildmasters exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The leader of the Guildmasters, a tall, calculating woman known as Vesitorm, spoke first. "You speak of a nexus, a unification of the galaxy's forces," she said, her voice smooth and commanding. "But we are merchants, Captain. We deal in power, in control, and in the flow of resources. What is there for the Syndicate in your unity? What is the profit to be made?" Alara's heart raced, but her mind stayed sharp. She had known this question would come. The Syndicate's priorities were always self-serving, and it was up to her to offer them a deal they couldn't refuse. "The Nexus itself is a game-changer," she replied, her tone confident. "It allows for real-time control of fleet movements, access to restricted resources, and the ability to manipulate galactic trade routes in ways you've never imagined. And if we succeed in forming an alliance, you'll be at the forefront of the reconstruction. You'll control the flow of resources once the war is won." Vesa leaned forward, her sharp eyes studying Alara intently. "And if we fail, what happens then?" "Then you'll be just as dead as the rest of us," Alara answered, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "The alien forces won't care who you are or what you have. They'll reduce everything to ash. But if we unite now together, we can change the course of this war. The galaxy will be ours to rebuild. A murmur ran through the council as Alara's words sank in. The guildmasters, for all their greed and cunning, were not blind to the gravity of the situation. The syndicate thrived on control, but that control was fleeting if the galaxy fell into chaos. Finally, Vessa stood, her eyes narrowing. "You make a compelling argument, Captain, but we will not join you out of the goodness of our hearts. We will need to see results. We will need proof that the Nexus can be more than just a theory." Alara nodded, knowing this was as much as she could expect. "We'll give you the data. We'll prove the Nexus's potential, and you'll see firsthand how much power you could hold if you join the effort." As Alara left the Nexus, she couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious optimism. The Syndicate was not an easy faction to sway, but Vessa Torm had recognized the value of the Nexus. The path forward was still uncertain, but humanity was one step closer to forming the unified front they needed to face the alien onslaught. The fractured peace was slowly beginning to mend, but the hardest battles, both on the diplomatic front and in the war against the alien fleet, were yet to come. Captain Alara Gray's journey was far from over. With the Eridani Syndicate's tentative agreement secured, her next destination loomed large, an ancient alliance that had fractured long before the galaxy's current turmoil. The United Helix Coalition, a group once unified by shared ideals of peace and prosperity, had since splintered into rival factions, each vying for control of their territory and their future. For Alara, the Helix Coalition represented a delicate challenge: to reunite those who had once stood as humanity's shining hope, but now found themselves locked in a cold war of their own. The Helix Coalition's capital, Helix Prime, was a beacon of what could have been, an architectural marvel, towering spires surrounded by lush gardens and shimmering water cities. But beneath the idyllic surface, tensions ran high. The Helix was a society built on balance, but decades of infighting had left its core fragile. Political maneuvering, distrust, and suspicion had divided the once proud coalition into factions of radical reformists, conservative isolationists, and opportunistic mercenaries. Alara arrived at Helix Prime aboard the Crimson Dawn, her warship now augmented with the data from the Crystallians and the Syndicate. She had spent weeks analyzing the intricacies of the Nexus, enhancing it with each new piece of knowledge, but her mind was heavy with the weight of the task ahead. The Helix needed to be unified, not just politically, but ideologically. And she had no delusions about how difficult that would be. Upon landing, Alara was greeted by an uneasy silence. The city was beautiful, yes, but it was a city of ghosts. Helix Prime's streets were eerily quiet, save for the occasional flash of a military patrol or the sharp eyes of those still loyal to their fractured cause. The grandeur of the place hid its cracks, fissures that were invisible to the untrained eye, but would tear apart any hope of alliance if not addressed. The leaders of the Helix Coalition had agreed to meet her, though the tension was palpable. The council chambers were a high-tech blend of ancient marble and cutting-edge digital displays, their surfaces displaying maps of the galaxy and intricate political schematics. In the center of the room sat the three primary figures of the Helix: Governor Talis Forn, a veteran politician, once respected for her vision of unity; Admiral Calenduris, a brilliant strategist who now led a faction that sought to return to isolationism; and Marius Riss, the leader of the radical reformists, whose rhetoric had become dangerously aggressive in the wake of the coalition's decline. As Alara stepped into the chamber, each leader studied her carefully, their expressions unreadable. Captain Gray, Governor Vorn, spoke first, her voice calm but laced with the years of experience that had kept her in power. "We've received your offer. We know the stakes. But trust is a currency in short supply here. What assurance do we have that your Nexus will not be another tool of centralization, another weapon to strip us of our autonomy?" Alara's eyes met the governor's, her tone resolute. "I am offering you the future, Governor, a future where your people have the freedom to chart their own course while standing together to defeat a common enemy. The Nexus allows us to connect without losing our independence, but without it, we will remain scattered and weak, easy prey for the forces that seek our destruction." Admiral Duras, arms crossed, snorted derisively. "Easy prey. We've thrived for centuries without some nexus to control our every move. Your technology may be impressive, but it is no match for our military strength. The Coalition needs no crutch to defeat the alien invaders. What we need is isolation, protection, to rebuild without interference from the likes of you." Alara's patience was wearing thin, but she held herself in check. The alien forces are not just an invasion. They are a force of annihilation. They'll wipe out your fleet, your isolationism, your strength. And if you stand alone, you'll fall alone. The Nexus will help you fight. It will help all of us fight. Marius Rhys, the youngest of the three, stood up abruptly. His fiery eyes burned with radical passion, the holographic maps in front of him flickering as his hands hovered over them. "And what of the people, Captain? What of the billions who suffer while you sit in your conference rooms making decisions for them? Your so-called unity is nothing but the chains of your own making. How can we trust a network that controls everything?" Alara paused, weighing her words carefully. "I'm not here to make decisions for you, Marius. I'm here to offer a choice. A choice to stand with us, to stand with the galaxy, or to risk everything in a fight you cannot win. The Nexus isn't a tool of control. It's a lifeline." A tense silence hung over the room. Each leader mulled over her words, and for the first time in a long while, Alara saw a flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. The Helix Coalition was fracturing under the weight of its divisions, but perhaps there was a chance to restore what had been lost. After what felt like an eternity, Governor Vorn finally spoke, her voice soft but unwavering. "We will consider your offer, Captain, but do not mistake this for agreement. If you wish to unite us, you must prove your worth. Show us that the Nexus is not just a weapon, but a tool of survival." Alara's heart raced, but she held herself steady. She had done all she could to convince them. Now, the real test began. Would the Helix Coalition join the fight, or would their divisions tear them apart for good? The galaxy's future depended on the answer. The following days on Helix Prime were a blur of tense discussions and strained negotiations. Alara had given the coalition leaders time to deliberate, but she knew the clock was ticking. The alien forces were advancing, and every delay was a gift to the enemy. Yet, despite the urgency of the situation, the Helix leaders couldn't seem to find common ground. Their distrust was so deeply rooted that even the alien threat wasn't enough to overcome their ideological divides. Alara sat in the quiet of her personal quarters aboard the Crimson Dawn, staring at the map of the galaxy spread out before her. The Nexus was functional, but without the unified backing of the Helix, it was just a tool, one that wouldn't live up to its potential. She couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The future of humanity, and the galaxy at large, rested in her hands. The door to her quarters chimed, breaking her thoughts. Alara stood, wiping her hands on her uniform before gesturing for the visitor to enter. It was Commander Darius Faulkner, her trusted second-in-command, his face drawn with concern. "Captain," he said, voice low, "we've just received word from the Crystallian Empire. Their fleet has encountered a breach in the Outer Rim. The alien forces are moving in faster than expected." Alara's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough," Darius replied. "They're requesting immediate reinforcement. The Crystallian fleet is holding, but just barely. They don't have the numbers to sustain a prolonged defense." Alara's thoughts raced. If the Crystallian forces fell, the Outer Rim would be lost. The alien invaders would gain a foothold that could spell disaster for the rest of the galaxy. And without the Helix's support, they would be forced to face this threat alone. "I'll go to the Council," she said, her voice firm. "This can't wait any longer. If we lose the Outer Rim, we lose the war. I need their decision, now." The tension in the council chambers was palpable when Alara entered. The three leaders, Governor Vorn, Admiral Duras, and Marius Rhys, were seated at the long table, their faces as unreadable as ever. Alara had been prepared for this moment, but the sheer weight of the task ahead left her uneasy. The urgency of the Crystallian plea pressed down on her, making the political games in this room feel increasingly irrelevant. "Governor," she began, her voice carrying the full gravity of the situation, "we don't have the luxury of waiting any longer. The Crystallians are under siege, and the enemy is closing in on the outer rim. We need your support. The Nexus can coordinate our fleets, giving us the tactical advantage we desperately need. But we can't afford to be divided. This is the moment where you must choose. Will you stand with us, or will you remain divided while the galaxy burns?" Governor Vorn didn't speak immediately. Her fingers drummed against the table, her eyes distant as she considered the implications. Marius Riss, on the other hand, couldn't contain his frustration. "And if we join you, Captain, what then?" He spat. "Will we be forced to sacrifice our autonomy, our ideals, just to be a pawn in your grand game? You call it unity, but I see only a consolidation of power." Alara met his gaze with a fire of her own. "You're wrong, Marius. What I offer is the chance to preserve your ideals, to ensure that your voice is heard. The Nexus isn't about control, it's about survival. If we don't act now, we'll all be dead before we can even think about the future." Admiral Duras, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. "You're asking us to abandon our independence and throw ourselves into a conflict that's not our own. Isolationism has kept us safe for centuries. Why would we risk everything for a cause that isn't even ours?" Alara took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm. "Because if we don't fight this together, we won't survive. The alien forces are methodical, relentless. They won't stop at the outer rim. They'll keep coming, and when they reach your borders, you won't be able to defend yourselves. The Nexus is not a crutch, it's a lifeline. It's the only thing that can give us a chance." There was a long, uncomfortable silence as the leaders weighed her words. The decision was monumental, and she knew that the direction of the war and the future of humanity hinged on this very moment. But despite her pleas, the Helix leaders seemed no closer to a consensus. Finally, Governor Vorn leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "I will support the Nexus, but under one condition," she said. "You must agree to a neutral zone, a region where no single faction holds ultimate power, a place where all of us can operate independently, without fear of domination." Alara felt a surge of relief, but quickly composed herself. "Agreed. But the defense of the galaxy comes first. We'll keep our promises, Governor, but we can't afford to let politics get in the way of survival." Marius Rice and Admiral Duras exchanged uneasy glances, but neither opposed the proposal. "Very well," Admiral Duras finally said, his voice gruff. "We'll send our fleets to the outer rim. But don't think for a second that this is over. We're watching you, Captain." As Alara left the council chambers, she knew the hardest battles were yet to come, not just in the stars, but here on the ground, with the factions she had yet to unite. But for the first time in weeks, there was a glimmer of hope. The Helix Coalition had taken its first step toward unity, and with it, the possibility of victory. The galaxy wasn't lost. Not yet. The Crimson Dawn broke through the atmosphere of Helix Prime, its sleek hull cutting through the sky like a blade. Alara Gray stood on the bridge, her hands clasped behind her back, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. The Helix Coalition had finally agreed to stand with humanity, and their fleets had been mobilized to reinforce the Crystallians. But despite the victory in the council chambers, the true challenge lay ahead, maintaining that fragile unity while preparing for the most perilous battle the galaxy had ever seen. The Crystallian fleet had sent a distress signal only hours after the agreement, confirming that the alien forces had intensified their assault on the outer rim. Alara had no illusions. The enemy's strategy was brutal and efficient. They would not give up ground easily, and their relentless advance was a reminder of the galaxy's vulnerability. If the combined fleets failed, it would be a devastating blow to humanity's war effort. As the Crimson Dawn moved toward the assembly point, Alara reviewed the incoming data. The Helix forces were slowly arriving at the rally point in the Outer Rim, and though their ships were formidable, they had never faced an invasion like this. The alien forces were not just a military threat. They were an existential one. Their ability to adapt, learn, and counter every human tactic made them a formidable foe. They had already defeated entire fleets with terrifying precision. Now, the galaxy's last defense was a patchwork coalition of forces who were still struggling to reconcile their differences. Darius Faulkner approached her from behind, his footsteps steady and purposeful. "Captain, the Helix fleet has arrived. They've deployed to the perimeter, but their coordination isn't ideal. There's still significant mistrust between factions, and some of the units are hesitant to integrate with the Crystallian forces." Alara's jaw tightened. The alliance was still too fragile, and time was running out. "We don't have time for hesitation, Commander. We need to move forward as one, or we risk everything. Make it clear to them. This is not a negotiation. The fate of the galaxy depends on their cooperation." Darius nodded, though his expression remained grim. "Understood, Captain." As the Crimson Dawn neared the Outer Rim, Alara's mind shifted from diplomacy to strategy. She couldn't afford to let the alien forces catch them off guard. They needed a solid plan, and fast. She activated the communication system, connecting to the Allied fleet commanders. "Commander Voss," she said, addressing the head of the Crystallian fleet, "we're setting up in formation. We'll engage the enemy in the first wave. The Helix units will take point, and we'll provide support from the rear. Stay on your toes. This will be a test of our coordination." Voss's voice came through the comms, calm and steady. "We'll be ready, Captain. But you know as well as I do, this is no ordinary battle. These invaders don't follow the rules. They adapt too quickly." Alara's lips curled into a tight smile, her resolve hardening. "That's why we'll surprise them. We'll strike fast, we'll strike hard, and we'll make them regret ever underestimating humanity." The holographic display before her flickered, showing the enemy's approaching fleet, massive ships with advanced weaponry, their dark hulls bristling with energy weapons. The enemy had clearly learned from their previous encounters with human forces. Their ships were more heavily armed and better coordinated than ever before. The task ahead seemed insurmountable, but Alara wasn't one to back down. She activated the battle coordination system, sending commands to the fleet. "All units, prepare for engagement. Helix ships, move to the front. Crystallian forces, take up defensive positions along the flank. We'll engage on my signal. Keep your formations tight, and don't break ranks. This is our best chance to show the galaxy what we can do." Darius's voice crackled over the intercom. "Captain, the Helix forces are still skittish. Some of them are second-guessing their orders." Alara's fingers danced across the command panel, her mind racing. The last thing they needed was indecision in the face of battle. But she couldn't force the leaders of the Helix factions into cooperation any further. She had to make them understand that this was the moment for unity, or the galaxy would fall. "Send a message to their commanders. I want them to know that if they falter here, they will have no place in the future we're fighting for," she said, her voice cold and unwavering. As the communication channels buzzed with activity, a deep sense of urgency filled the air. Every moment counted. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. This battle would define her career, her legacy, and possibly the fate of her species. She couldn't afford to fail. "Captain," Darius called, breaking her concentration. "The first wave of alien ships is entering the system. They're locking weapons on our fleet." Alara's heart pounded in her chest. This was it, the point of no return. "Engage," she commanded. The Crimson Dawn surged forward, its weapon systems roaring to life as it joined the fray. The sky around them exploded in a cacophony of energy blasts and explosions. The battle for the Outer Rim had begun, and there was no turning back. As the chaos unfolded, Alara's thoughts remained on the alliance she had fought so hard to build. The Helix leaders had agreed to fight together, But in the heat of battle, would they hold true to their word, or would their differences tear them apart at the moment when unity mattered most? The answer would come soon enough. The battle erupted with a deafening roar as energy beams collided and explosions rippled through the void. Alara's hands gripped the command chair tightly as the Crimson Dawn weaved between the advancing enemy ships, its weapons blazing in perfect synchrony with the coordinated fire of the Helix and Crystallian fleets. The galaxy's last hope was hanging in the balance, and for the moment, the chaos felt like a distant storm, urgent, powerful, but still distant. But as the first waves of enemy fire slammed into the shields of the Helix ships, Alara's hope faltered. The Helix forces had formed a rough line, but their cohesion was weak. Small pockets of resistance formed across the fleet as some factions hesitated, while others veered off course, unwilling to take orders from ships they saw as rivals. The enemy was too well organized, their ships moving as one, a single entity working in perfect harmony. A blast of fire from an enemy destroyer rocked the Crimson Dawn. Alara gritted her teeth as the ship's shields flickered dangerously, sending a wave of feedback through her control panel. On the view screen, the outer rim exploded with activity, each fleet ship engaged in a desperate struggle, but the scattered Helix forces were already feeling the pressure. "Commander Faulkner," Alara barked, her voice sharp as ever. "We need to reinforce the flank. Crystallian ships are being overwhelmed. Move the Helix ships into position." Darius' face appeared on the screen, his expression hard. "They're not responding, Captain. Some of them are retreating. The ships are breaking formation." A surge of anger and fear coursed through Alara's veins. This was it, the moment where the Alliance either stood together or shattered into pieces. Every second counted, and they couldn't afford any more hesitation. "Damn it, I need those ships in line now," she snapped, her voice steady, though her mind raced. Her fingers flew across the controls, sending a direct message to the Helix commanders. "This is Captain Gray. You will hold formation. If you abandon your positions now, you'll be responsible for the destruction of humanity's future. Do not break ranks. This is your final warning." Across the battlefield, the Helix ships faltered again. One by one, they began to scatter, slipping from the established formations. Panic was spreading like wildfire, and the alien forces seized on the opportunity. Their sleek ships surged forward with deadly intent, closing in on the exposed flank of the Crystallian fleet. The first ship to fall was a Helix destroyer, its hull torn apart in a brilliant flash. The debris of its remains flared against the black backdrop of space, and Alara felt the weight of that loss in her chest. The Alliance was crumbling before her eyes. "Commander Faulkner, get me on comms with all fleet commanders. Now," she ordered, desperation edging her voice. Darius nodded grimly. Moments later, the faces of the remaining Helix commanders flickered into view. The tension was palpable as they stared at Alara, their brows furrowed, each of them silently questioning the worth of their commitment. "This isn't working." Marius Rice, one of the most vocal of the commanders, shouted, his face red with frustration. "We can't trust the Crystallians. Look at this. We're losing our ships." Alara clenched her fists. "We're losing because of your reluctance, Marius. This isn't just about your faction. It's about the survival of every living being in this galaxy. If you don't hold your ground, we're finished." But even as she spoke, the situation grew worse. More Helix ships faltered and peeled away, some retreating into hyperspace, others fleeing the battle entirely. The Crystallian fleet was overwhelmed, their forces unable to keep up with the intensity of the alien assault. The enemy had learned, adapted, and now they were picking apart the disorganized remnants of the coalition. One of the largest Crystallian battleships, the Lumen's Wrath, detonated in a massive fireball, its remains scattered across the battlefield. Alara's heart sank. The loss was not just a strategic blow, it was a psychological one. The first major casualty in the battle, and it had come from her strongest ally. She gritted her teeth and turned back to the command panel. "Darius, we need tow." Before she could finish, the alarms blared across the bridge, and the entire ship shuddered. The Crimson Dawn was rocked by another explosion, this one closer than the last. The ship's warning system flashed as hull integrity warnings appeared across the screen. "Captain, we've lost our aft shields," Darius called out, his voice tinged with panic. "Incoming enemy fighters. Heavy damage to the lower deck." The Crimson Dawn shuddered again as multiple smaller alien ships tore into the exposed flank, their lasers cutting through the hull like paper. The sound of metal groaning and twisting echoed through the ship, and alarms continued to blare. Alara's eyes narrowed. They were on the edge of losing everything. "All hands, brace for impact," she shouted. But even as the command left her lips, she knew they were fighting the losing battle. As the Crimson Dawn took another hit, Alara's thoughts turned to the shattered alliance. The Helix factions had been too divided, too mistrustful to hold their ground. And now, humanity's last hope hung by a thread. Would the alliance collapse entirely, or could she find a way to hold them together, long enough to strike back? The answer was uncertain, but the fight was far from over. The Crimson Dawn lurched violently as another salvo of enemy fire hammered into its exposed flank. Alara's grip tightened on the command chair, her knuckles white with the strain. The ship's lights flickered, casting ominous shadows across the bridge. Crew members scrambled to their stations, their movements swift but frantic. The Crimson Dawn was damaged, but it wasn't destroyed. Not yet. "Captain, the aft shields are down to 10%. Darius called out, his voice tense. "We're losing power to the lower engines. If we don't regain control soon, we'll be sitting ducks." Alara's mind raced, but her focus never wavered. The situation was dire, but she had learned long ago that there was no room for panic in command. She quickly assessed their options, her eyes darting over the rapidly changing battle map. The enemy fleet, though still in disarray, had begun to regroup, forming a new line of attack. They were adapting faster than she had anticipated, and the Helix forces, now scattered and in retreat, had left a gaping hole in their defenses. The Crystallian fleet, though still resilient, was overwhelmed. Their ships were scattered, too few in number to contend with the relentless waves of alien assault. Alara knew that if the coalition collapsed completely, the invaders would destroy what little hope remained for the galaxy. The pain of losing so many ships, the countless lives, gnawed at her, but she forced it down. There was no room for grief. Not yet. Not until they won. "Commander Faulkner," Alara said, her voice cold but steady, "I need you to take the Crimson Dawn into the heart of the battle. We're going to push through and strike their command ship directly. If we take it out, we might disrupt their entire fleet." Darius hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding, his resolve firm. "Understood, Captain. I'll lead the way." Alara's heart pounded as she watched Darius issue the order, the Helix ships rallying around the Crimson Dawn in an attempt to regroup. The remaining Crystallian forces were already preparing their final line of defense. Alara knew they had to act quickly, before the entire battle became a massacre. The Crimson Dawn lurched again, but this time it was different. The ship jolted forward, as if propelled by sheer will. Alara held her breath, her fingers hovering over the weapons panel. The ship's primary cannons fired in unison, sending brilliant beams of concentrated energy tearing into the approaching alien fighters. The tide of the battle had shifted, but it was only a matter of time before the invaders retaliated. "Ready the jump drives," Alara ordered, her voice unwavering. "We're going in. No turning back." Her crew didn't hesitate. The jump coordinates were set, and the navigational systems began their countdown. She watched the seconds tick away, her mind running through the plan again. They had one chance, one shot, to make the enemy feel the weight of their defiance. "Jump drive ready, Captain," Darius called, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. "Engaging in 3, 2, 1." In an instant, The Crimson Dawn and its small flotilla of ships plunged into hyperspace. The stars stretched and distorted into brilliant streaks of light as they tore through the fabric of space. The tension on the bridge was palpable. Alara's eyes never left the redouts, her entire focus on the coordinates ahead. Within moments, they arrived. The battle was raging around them, but they had arrived at the heart of the enemy's forces. There, just beyond a field of scattered wreckage, stood the alien command ship. It was massive, its dark hull bristling with energy weapons and defensive systems. The last vestiges of the remaining Helix and Crystallian ships were gathered around the command ship, preparing for their final assault. Alara's breath caught in her throat. This was their chance. "All ships, follow my lead," she commanded. "Target their central reactor. No mercy." The Crimson Dawn surged forward, its weapons blazing, cutting a path through the alien ships. Darius maneuvered expertly, weaving through the chaos with precision. The remaining ships followed, firing as they advanced, but it was clear that this final push was not just a matter of firepower. It was about everything they had fought for: the unity, the sacrifices, and the belief that humanity could still save the stars from certain annihilation. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded, but they would not surrender. The Crimson Dawn made a final desperate lunge toward the enemy command ship, its energy shields buckling under the onslaught. The alien forces, realizing the threat, closed in, but it was too late. The Crimson Dawn fired its final barrage, a concentrated volley of high-energy beams aimed directly at the heart of the command ship. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Then, the enemy command ship exploded in a blinding flash of light, the shockwave rippling outward as the surviving ships were sent careening into space. The alien fleet faltered, and for the first time in the battle, the tide began to turn. Alara watched in stunned silence, her heart pounding in her chest. They had done it. They had struck the heart of the enemy's power. But the victory came at a great cost. The Crimson Dawn was barely operational, its systems failing one by one. And as Alara stared at the debris of the enemy command ship, she knew that while this battle was won, the war was far from over. Humanity had proven that, together, they could overcome even the most insurmountable odds. But they would need to rebuild what had been broken and face the next wave of threats that loomed on the horizon. As the Crimson Dawn limped away from the battlefield, its crew battered but resolute, Alara's mind turned toward the future. The galaxy was still divided, still fragile, but for the first time in a long while, there was hope. The crimson horizon had dawned, and humanity would stand against whatever came next.